That was David's word. You ever wonder why he put 5 in there? I don't think that has anything to do with grace. You know, we go 5's the number of grace. He put grace in his bag. We didn't use them all. I mean, if 5's the number of grace, you only use 1, which means, I don't know, if you're going to stretch numerology, I guess you only need 1/5 of the finished work to knock down giants. I don't think that was it. Curious, and this is just a freebie. This is the kind of stuff that slows us down, though. This is just a freebie. The Bible later tells you that Goliath had 4 brothers. I honestly think David put all 5 stones in the bag in case the whole family showed up. I really do. I think he walked out of the valley and went, okay, there's 5 of them. I will knock them down one at a time if I have to. But he went back and dumped the other 4 in this creek because he went, well, they didn't show up. Good for them. That one was his and that one was his. I don't know. But I've often thought that when you discover later there were 4 brothers, the math makes sense to me. But you get it then into the life of Jesus. And Jesus doesn't appear to be really working off of these Torah motifs. He doesn't ever walk up and start explaining numerology, and he doesn't spend a lot of time making these little connections. You don't see that in the life of Jesus. Again, I think Jesus walks out an experiential grace, not a theoretical religion. Jesus doesn't spend a whole lot of time on theoretical theology. He spends a lot of time on practical theology. He spends a lot of time touching people. He spends a lot of time listening to people. He spends a lot of time speaking into people's lives. He spends a lot of time raising them up, healing them, curing them. But he's not immune to the understanding of or the utilization of some of these Old Testament motifs. So Jesus is sitting outside of the temple, and the Pharisees bring to him a woman that they've caught in the act of adultery. And that's not fair to say the Pharisees. It's really just a bunch of rabble-rousers who've possibly even been hired by the Pharisees for all we know. We definitely know that whatever they have up their sleeve, they have it with a motivating factor of trying to trap Jesus. It is not to uphold the law of Moses, because if they truly wanted to uphold the law of Moses, they would have brought both the man and the woman. Because the law of Moses doesn't say that if there's 2 people caught in the act of adultery, you stone the woman to death. The law of Moses does say that if 2 people are sleeping together that are married to somebody else, that you stone them both to death. And so if you want to keep the law to perfection, if you're not out here trying to pull shenanigans, which they are, they would have brought the man and the woman. So we know out of the gate, and Jesus wasn't immune to knowing this as well, that somebody's up to something slick, because you've brought just the woman. And as they toss the woman like a rag doll in front of Jesus, who is sitting there, and we don't know all of all the complete scenery. We don't know all of the contextual surrounding, and we don't know why Jesus is there. Perhaps he's just relaxing with his disciples, or doing what we expect Jesus is probably doing, ministering to whoever comes by, speaking into their life, touching lives. And they bring this woman and toss her at his feet, and they say this in verse 4 of John 8, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned, but what do you say?" And this they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. And I think not only do we see them bringing only the woman but not the man, but we see, according to the narrator, John, that they brought this so that they could test Jesus to see how he would respond to a breach of the Mosaic law. Will Jesus uphold Moses, or will Jesus fight against Moses? It's a very simple test. We've caught her, and they use the phrase, in the very act. They've even went to the lengths of doing what the Old Testament tells them they're supposed to do all things in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. So they don't bring 1 guy with the woman or 2 guys with the woman. There are at least 3 with the woman, because according to Old Testament law, you could not put out capital punishment without at least 3 witnesses that witnessed the crime. So we have at least 3 men, and possibly 30, who knows, that are bringing this woman to Jesus to entrap him, because he really is in a catch-22, right? I mean, if he says, yes, stone her, then Jesus has been complicit in the destruction of a human life, and this is something that he's built his ministry on being the opposite of. What does he tell his disciples? The Son of Man came not to destroy men's lives, but to save them. He'll say in just a couple of chapters, and John is not necessarily chronological, by the way, so he may have already said this by the time the woman is caught in the act of adultery. I've come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundant. Jesus doesn't come to make people perish. He comes to give people life. So he's trapped if he says stone her, but if he says don't stone her, then he's ignoring Moses, and he's acting like the law doesn't matter. And he would get accused of what all of us get accused of every time we preach grace, and that's thinking sin's no big deal. You go, well, if you don't stone her, then you're saying adultery's not a big deal, and you're calling all these witnesses liars, and you're really calling Moses a liar. And if you're calling Moses a liar, aren't you calling God a liar? And how can you call yourself the Son of God if you don't uphold the law? This is a tough cookie. So Jesus responds by just writing in the dirt. And I don't know what he wrote, and I've heard a lot of teachings and sermons and commentaries on what he wrote. And I don't know that it's that important. Otherwise, I think the Holy Spirit might have gave us a hint. But he did tell us twice that he wrote on the ground. He did it once. They spoke. He did it again. I tend to have my own theories, none of which really matter all that much. But what does matter, I believe, is what transpires. Because watch how Jesus handles the situation in one of the toughest situations any of us could ever be put into. Listen to verse 7. When they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, and that means they continued to say it over and over and over again. Jesus had ignored it over and over and over again. Personally, I believe that as Jesus is writing on the ground, he's talking to the Father. How do you want me to respond? And so they accuse her again, and the whole time it's as if Jesus is ignoring them. And as he's listening to the Holy Spirit, how do you want me to respond? Daddy, what do you want me to say? Finally, after repeated accusation over and over again, Jesus said, he who is without sin, this is verse 7, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Or as the old King James says, the way I heard it in my head growing up, he without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. One of the most popular and most famous sayings in the history of English literature. He without sin among you, let him cast the first stone. And one thing that rarely gets pointed out in this moment of Jesus' ministry is that Jesus encourages you to throw rocks at people who are guilty. Jesus does not say, don't stone her. Jesus says, stone her. Jesus actually gives the perfect formulaic answer of someone who's cornered. He upholds the law of Moses by saying, you're right, she deserves to die. But he upholds the integrity of life-giving new covenant by putting a restriction on who gets to kill her. And so Jesus says, yes, stone her, she deserves to die, but make sure that if you throw the stone first, you've inspected your life to make sure that there should be no stones thrown at you. And if you qualify, by all means, kill her. It was the perfect answer because it puts both situations at odds with one another. The upholding of perfect law and the difficulty of people to uphold perfect law, or the impossibility of people to uphold perfect law. And so Jesus is encouraging her, I'll tell you what, stone her to death because she deserves it. But make sure you don't deserve to be stoned to death before you do so. And so, of course, what happens is people begin now to introspect. They've been inspecting outside all morning long. Found them a good adulterous woman. I think she was probably set up. Otherwise, why didn't you bring the guy? And so they've been outward inspecting everybody they see, and now they're forced to introspect, and it's in a public place. It's in a place where if they throw that rock, everyone's going to see them throw it, and what they're saying before God and man is, I'm perfect and have the right to throw rocks. And none of us want to do that because, listen, if you live in a glass house, what should you not do? It's a good idea to stop chucking rocks if you live in a glass house. And when you're in a public format and you've just told everybody I'm the perfect one that can throw rocks, how many of you know the world's going to make it their business to find out if you are perfect? We've all seen that. And if you're in a glass house, it's not going to be that hard to figure out that you're not. I mean, you just follow somebody around for 10 minutes and you'll find some reason to say you probably shouldn't have thrown that rock a little earlier at that guy because this doesn't look real well for you right here.